So on November 1st, about 20,000 Google employees walked out in protest about a range of issues, including how the company dealt with some very high-profile sexual abuse claims within the organisation. Now, Google management have said they heard, they dealt with it, but the people that ran that protest are not as convinced. And now there's something of a standoff between Google staff and Google's management. And so what does that mean for you and all your searching things? Probably not a great deal, but it does affect the future of technology. And to tell me, the dumbest person in the room, how all that is going to work, please welcome our panellists this week. Ariel Bogle is the technology reporter across the ABC. Seamus Byrne is the managing editor of Innovation Oz. Ariel, take me back to the beginning of this. Why were people walking out in the first place?
That walkout was over concerns about how the company has been treating sexual harassment within its ranks. So a few months ago, there was a really big report looking at the treatment of some of Google's leadership who had been accused of sexual harassment and basically got a golden handshake when they left the company, you know, in the realm of millions of dollars in redundancy pay.
Which is exactly what you want to do to people that have been accused of sexual assault.
Yes, exactly. So naturally, there was some consternation within Google, within the rank and file. And this is part of an ongoing issue with Google over pay equity as well. So there's actually been a lawsuit filed in the past over accusations that Google has been paying women less. The company obviously denies that strongly, but I think this has sort of reached a peak. This is the year of Me Too, of course, and Google staff, like staff all over the world or people all over the world, are naturally concerned about how the treatment of women within companies like this.
Yeah, and interestingly, the leadership of Google said, you know, we've got the message, but it seems like the people that have been organising these walkouts and protests really are not convinced that Google have got the message. Where's the disconnect there, Seamus?
I think it really fits into this broader picture of how everybody's really starting to question Silicon Valley as a whole concept. The idea that...
as a concept?
Yeah.
It's like, it's not there, guys. It's made up. It's like unicorns.
Yeah, look, you know, its name isn't even Silicon Valley. It's a made-up name, let's face it.
Is it? There's no...
Well, like they made it up back in the 50s, you know. There wasn't
What is
actually...
Silicon Valley but like a lot of car parks all in a row? You know?
Yeah. It's a system of tubes. I don't know what it is. So,
But
yes.
look, I think, you know, the big thing is always that they're super comfortable with the carefully worded apology, you know, and that we're not seeing genuine proactive changes that say, you know what, we're hearing what our people... And before they need to do something, we're going to now give them you know, something new, or we're going to step up and create a new opportunity for people. It's kind of kept fitting into this idea of, you know, crunch culture, and everything is about working harder, not smarter, you know, and yet they're supposedly making tools that let us work smarter. It's just never... It's never on the front foot when it comes to these kinds of issues. And the fact that right at this moment in the wider history of the world, we're really starting to push for these sorts of changes. You know, I think in a lot of ways, we'd hope that some of these, you know, leading technology companies would actually be able to lead in this sort of social way as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think the issue of underpaying women or not taking sexual harassment seriously within big companies is nothing new. And perhaps we would be disappointed but not surprised to find that going on within oil companies or, you know, multinational finance companies.
But there's a notion that
they were meant to be better. Or at least they were founded with very direct ethoses around doing good, opening up the world, like promoting equality, democracy, the sharing of information.
Yeah. Don't be evil.
all the banners, you know, all the banners, but they're not living up to that expectation that they set for themselves. And so this is where some of the interest in this comes from, especially from the press. I think there's a bit of schadenfreude, if that's the word, amongst the press to see these companies fail to live up to their expectations. I think it's very fair to report on it, and the staff are right to be, you know, protesting and taking on their companies. But I have to admit, as a journalist, narratives creep in, and this narrative about companies that said they were so good, not living up to their expectations, is one that it is... I think any journalist would be lying if they said they didn't enjoy that.
Way
to an
to show
extent.
your hand, Ariel Bogle.
Well, I just want to be honest with the people out there that narratives get set, and I think it's very fair to report on sexual harassment at Google and on these staff protests. But this year has been a year of disappointments for Silicon Valley, and I think journalists have to be honest with themselves about how these issues get reported
I've just decided that the final episode of this season, which is going to be in 2 weeks' time, will be Silicon Schadenfreude, which I've just realised is really hard to say out loud. What does success look like for the people that walked out, right? Because I think there's an array of issues that have been raised in this walkout and the ensuing conversation that's come with Google issuing sort of open letters and responses. I'm curious about, is there a set list of actionable things that the protesters in this instance want, Seamus?
I mean, quite often these sorts of protests are about essentially just trying to plant that flag of saying
the culture is not acceptable.
We want you to do something, you know, and that's where it would be good for a company to be able to sort of see this and not just respond with, you know, with nice words, but actually really quickly thereafter say, here's 3 initiatives that we're actually going to implement, you know, based on the idea that we can be, as a company leadership, you know, putting things forward ourselves rather than waiting on the collective demand of a workforce that, of course, you know, in America is typically not unionized in any way and therefore is always in that sort of difficult situation too. So to me, it feels like that would be the most, you know, important thing, would just be for them to come to some kind of a set of ideas that they say, look, here's what we're going to do next, and now we want to hear more from, you know, our team. And a big thing for me is human resources departments, you know, across the board right now, we're often sort of getting this sense that, you know, we're often, they try to convince us that they're there to look after us, but more often than not, there's a clear sense that a human resource department is there to protect the interests of the company from its employees. And we need to see that change.
Put a staff rep on the board of every company. Right. We need the German model.
I love you, like, we know you're talking about the ABC. No one didn't assume you were talking about the ABC.
We have one on the ABC. There is a staff rep on the board.
So just coming back to that idea of specific changes that the protesters are afterwards, what would be the ideal result out of this, do you imagine?
It's a good question. I think the Google staff have a set of, you know, proposals that they want moving forward, including this idea of having staff members more involved in leadership, maybe board representation. I think in general, though, it's been interesting this year to see Google staff taking up their voice. You know, these are companies that are notoriously closed to outside observation, but have, you know, generally really supported dialogue within themselves. So we can also look at the issue this year about Google wanting to reopen its search product in China. So this was reported first by The Intercept in August, and we haven't really heard anything particularly official from Google about it. They've just said that their work in China is exploratory, that they have no immediate plans to reopen search. They left search in China back in 2010. So at that time when it was reported, The Intercept, there was an internal petition. It was reported from Google staff members saying, well, voicing concerns, saying they wanted to know a bit more about this project. And then there was an open letter, which more than 300 Google staff members put their name to on Medium, also asking for the search project, Project Dragonfly, as it's called, to be shut down, saying it would amount to state surveillance, worrying about the precedent it would set. And this is a really interesting step for Google employees to take their voices outside the company and really, you know, put a flag in the sand, as it were, about the discomfort with the direction of the company.
And I guess it's worth pointing out that the discomfort stems from the fact that in order for Google to operate within China, they will have had to cede a whole bunch of control over the Chinese government in terms of censorship and surveillance, which is something that already exists in the homegrown social media market of China, with things like Weibo and stuff like that.
Yes, but they'd have to censor different search terms. You know, Tiananmen Square. The Intercept also reported at one point that Google's search app in China, as it was modelled, would potentially link people's search to their phone number, which is a level of, you know, surveillance which is pretty much unprecedented anywhere outside China. Politically, this is very troublesome for Google as well. Immediately after these reports came out, a variety of senators from both sides of the aisle sent a letter to Google voicing their disappointment with this plan, saying that it would be a coup, like just an absolute coup for China to make an American company censor itself in the way that they want to operate within China's borders. But, you know, the debate's there. Apparently there's another internal petition at Google on the other way, saying from about 500 staff members saying, yes, let's go ahead. It's part of Google's mission to bring information to the world, and us not being in China is a failure of that mission. I mean, 500 versus 400 or whatever the numbers are, it's obviously just a very small proportion of Google's actual staff size.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's interesting to see some debate there.
It's always really fascinating with that, because Silicon Valley companies are so baked with the DNA of an American approach to information, and ideas of freedom of speech and that sort of stuff is so baked into the DNA. And I was having a conversation with somebody who is from China, and they were like, well, I think it's important to recognize that value is not universal. And that creates its own challenges. And there's huge moral grey areas for companies that have emerged out of a philosophy of freedom of information, and how do they move into places where that is not, rightly or wrongly, the culture. And I think I find that moral grey area really interesting. Then when you combine it with the enormous surveillance apparatus that the Chinese government have, it becomes a little bit on the scary side.
Yeah.
So it's a really complicated arena. Hey, Download This Show is what you are listening to. It is a show where we discuss the week in media, technology and culture. My name is Mark Fennell, and I am the dumbest person in the room. We have Ariel Bogle, technology reporter across the ABC, and we have Seamus Byrne, who is the managing editor of innovationoz.com. He's also the Australian correspondent for Esports Observer, and we will be talking about something that involves an sport shortly. All right, so nobody likes looking at ads on the internet, right? No? What if you could get billions of fake users to look at those ads so it looked like the ads were successful, and then we didn't have to, right?
That sounds great.
Yes, well, it turns out the US State Department don't agree with you. They've unsealed indictments against 8 people who allegedly ran this very infamous online advertising scam, 3VE and MethBot. I don't even know why I said it out loud. You're never going to remember that ridiculous name.
They're important to the story too.
But it does speak to a huge issue with how advertising works on the internet. Just take me into the world of ad fraud. What was it that this scam sort of comprised of, Ariel?
Yeah, this is a really fascinating case, and one of the biggest so far to take on ad fraud rings. These 8 men were mostly Russian, and 3 are going to be extradited to the United States. So it'll be interesting to follow that case and see where it goes.
Does that not represent like an enormous amount of cooperation between 2 notorious foes?
Well, they weren't extradited from Russia. They were extradited from places like Malaysia and other countries.
Ah, right.
So, yeah. No help from Russia. No helping
I would
hand.
not have imagined so. Because I feel like if America wanted to extradite any Russian hackers, they've probably got some other ones they're interested in too.
So in broad strokes, there were 2 botnet rings essentially happening here. They represented basically that they ran legitimate companies that delivered advertisements to websites. So companies could buy an ad and hope that it would be seen by X number of people. But instead of these ads ever being seen by real people, they were run on fake websites and fake users saw them. So they had these server farms in places like Texas where they ran programs that made it look like people were scrolling through pages, or the mouse was moving, or people were logging into sites, and basically falsifying ad views and ad clicks, which is exactly how ad revenue is generated.
So do we have a sense of which brand, and it's weird to talk about brands as though they're victims, but I guess in this context they would be.
They are the victims, yeah.
And technically I think we as consumers might be winners, but we'll put that to one side. So do we know which sorts of brands were victims of this, or is it too disaggregated to know?
Yeah, we don't know at the moment. Maybe that will come out as the court case proceeds, but in the Department of Justice indictment, they don't name any brands specifically. But of course, this issue matters a lot to all types of brands. The internet, as a mostly free product, when you use Facebook, as we all know, use any website that's free, it's paid for by ad dollars. So if the underlying architecture of the digital ad market can be subject to this type of ad fraud, it really undermines that. So I think this case actually has really a lot of repercussions, as hard as it might be to understand how one runs a server farm from Texas generating false people looking at false websites from Malaysia.
Do you know who absolutely would love this news? TV networks. Because so much of TV networks' pitches in the last couple of years has been about we're a safe place to advertise. Our numbers are real. Our audiences are real. You're not going to be put up against some dodgy content.
Exactly.
Traditional publishers, and I guess I'll put radio and print in that bucket as well. But they must love stories like this.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about the idea of the trust economy, and that, off the back of all of the problems,
huge deficit right now.
Yeah, and it's like we saw all the issues with YouTube back at last year and the start of this year, and like across Facebook, there's so many of these big questions around buying programmatic advertising that gets generically placed against places that they promise are the right kind of person that's interested in what you want to sell them. This absolutely plays into that whole discussion again on maybe you need to choose who you spend your advertising money with rather than just spray it across the internet.
Download the Show is what you're listening to. It is your guide to the world in media, technology and culture. And without a doubt, the biggest, most talked about, not always in the best terms, game of the last 12 months is undeniably Fortnite. I'm old and lame and I have not played it. All I know is what the morning shows tell me, which is that it's evil and bad for my children. But that is not necessarily the case. And Seamus, you have been covering this great story where Fortnite, which I'll get you to explain for people that haven't heard of it before, but it's also making people dance. And somehow we have a version of Footloose playing out in the world right now.
It's true.
This is a great sell. Let's start with what Fortnite is and what it has become.
And can you floss?
I can floss.
End of this show. We're going to floss.
Look, so Fortnite is a game that actually came out last year, but it changed what it was at the start of 2018 to turn itself into this battle royale style of game. And that means 100 people all playing in a multiplayer game get dropped into this island. And then the idea is that you basically play out literally like the old movie Battle Royale or the then newer movie Hunger Games. You basically fight it out until there's one person left, and then that person has won the round, and rinse and repeat. The big thing that made it attractive was that it was free to play across every platform in existence, including mobile phones and tablets. It's done in a really sort of friendly, cartoonish graphical style. So as much as it is a game where you run around shooting people in the face, it's also... There's no blood. It's just a kind of good generic, zap, zap, zappy type of game.
Also, to be fair, you don't have to shoot them in the face. You can shoot them in the groin. You can shoot them in the arms. There's a variety of places you can shoot them in. All sorts of
places.
Yeah.
And of course, that was the big thing, was it became incredibly popular very quickly because of that free-to-play style. And that's when then suddenly people went, my kids are addicted. What do I do? And it's horribly violent and all that jazz. But I remember really...
The answer is parent. You parent them.
Yes. Yeah, which I've also written about in recent months. But there was a really good, aspect to this game from really early on. I remember in the first of the various TV debates I've had about this, pointing out that to actually succeed in this game, there's a whole building mechanic in the game where you have to kind of build and construct a fort to defend yourself in different parts of the game. So there's kind of quite a positive sort of aspect to how to succeed. But then there is this whole kind of colourful, fun side of the game that I think means the whole thing is kind of like a comedy, right? They have shopping trolleys that you can kind of ride around in the game because they didn't want to introduce vehicles like other games. So the first vehicle they introduced was a shopping trolley you could push a friend around in. They've done all these fun things, and a really big part of it is this whole system of emotes, which basically means that, when you're doing something in the game or you're standing around waiting for the next round to start, you can do all these dance moves. You actually have to kind of collect dance moves through an unlock system as well. So there's a few you can do, straight off the bat. But then as the game progressed, you could then, through its kind of whole leveling up system, you could start to kind of buy new dance moves or just unlock new dance moves. And it's amazing.
Can you do Australia's national dance, the Nutbush?
I don't think the nutbush is in the game.
Well, no. I protest.
No. But, what we see is everything from the floss, which, I mean, and it was there early enough that some people thought the floss came from Fortnite, which, of course, is not the case. But,
How long did you spend researching that to conclude that that was not the case?
Hey, I'm on top of my pop culture. I know that Miley Cyrus helped to popularize that from the Backpack Kid who appeared, on stage with her one time. So
shit.
I was already all across that, let me tell you.
Let's say the Nutbush is not in there, but what sort of dances are in there, and does that have real life implications? Because I'm going towards the Footloose Hawk in here.
Yeah, and look, that's it. It's been amazing to see that we've had this transition from all of these dances that are in there, and lots of them are pop culture references, which is why the floss sort of appeared in there in the first place. But it goes right back to like the Charleston is in there, a very old school dance move, right through to really quite complex, sort of modern video clip dance moves. There's one called like Orange Justice, which is this really quite complicated set of arm moves that I cannot do, unlike the floss. But then we've even got cool references to like dances from, Scrubs, the TV show, and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and all these kinds of pop culture references that are embedded through it. But what's amazing is kids have actually started trying to learn how to do the dance moves. And, I'd started seeing it just around the place and seeing, friends of my kids doing it. And then I started asking other people about it. And basically any parent of a kid of Fortnite age just went, oh, yeah, the kid's doing it all the time. And, so then I started asking teachers and different people about it. And it's happening everywhere, even through to say like NFL footballers and soccer players, when they're celebrating touchdowns or goals, they're starting to pull off Fortnite dance moves. So it's really kind of all pervasive, but people who haven't paid attention to Fortnite might not realize where these dances are appearing from.
And would there maybe be a small town where dancing is banned at some point because of Fortnite?
I can tell you there's at least one small town here in Australia. Of course, teachers are always very careful, so they've sort of said, please don't say where I'm from, but this has happened in my school. And, lots of places, of course, when a game gets totally over the top, they just decide, well, we're just banning the game. You can't play it in the playground, all that. But that has actually included them banning the dance from being done in the playground. Any dance related to Fortnite is suddenly banned. And you're like, why is it that we're actually so against this video game that we're also against the idea of kids actually practicing active dance moves in the playground instead of playing tips or whatever?
And that's all I needed so that I can name this episode Fortnite Footloose. Thank you for bringing me to that moment. There is lots more of this in the podcast of Download This Show. It is available right now. We're also talking about a man who had his vasectomy recorded by the Victorian government accidentally. That is an actual story, which you can find on the podcast of Download This Show. It's available now. My name is Mark Fennell, Ariel Bogle, Seamus Byrne, and with that, we bid you adieu. Have a great day.